Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Zero Trust for Ransomware Defense in Banking. Today's webinar is sponsored by the Texas Bankers ISAL and Alvin Mills, who is the VP of Information Technology and Security with the Texas Bankers Association. We also have Todd Hillis, who is the Chief Intelligence Officer at the International Association of Certified ISAOs, or ICE. And I am Jan Diamond. I am the Program Director here at ICE. And we also have Brian Waltermeyer, who is the CEO of Asgard. So today we're going to talk about what exactly is Zero Trust and cut through the hype and learn how you can actually operationalize Zero Trust. We're going to talk about why Zero Trust is such a powerful initiative now across the government. And we're going to talk about how to have an easy win in the race to Zero Trust with Eversafe. And we're also going to talk about how Eversafe saved a business from ransomware. So what exactly is Zero Trust? You know, this has been a buzzword across the industry. I'm sure you've heard a lot of the news of the day, and we'll talk through that in a minute. But to kind of give an overview of where we've come from with Zero Trust and where we are today. So the old trust paradigm was really trust but verify. A user was trusted in the network, protected by a firewall from the outside world, and leveraging passwords to access computing resources and applications. In the new trust paradigm, never trust, always verify. And now a user is not considered trusted, whether inside or outside the network, and mutual authentication and encryption are really required for all of those connections between computing resources and applications. So now we're going to talk about a brief history of Zero Trust. So back in 2004, the Jericho Forum was really the first organization to identify the challenges of the disappearing perimeter because of cloud and mobile technology. And Paul Simmons, who helped found the Jericho Forum, coined the term deperimeterization. Then in 2010, Forrester analyst John Kindervag saw the challenges of trust both outside and inside the network and identified that a firewall is really no longer adequate, and he coined the term Zero Trust. Then in 2014, Google got on the bandwagon. They really understood that Zero Trust was going to be critical for security in the future, and they also developed a Zero Trust security model that shifts access from the perimeter to users and devices, requiring authentication and encryption. And then in 2018, another Forrester analyst, Chase Cunningham, launched the Zero Trust extended ecosystem and the 7 pillars of Zero Trust. And then now in 2021, we've really seen an all-in effort on Zero Trust. 2021 is really a breakout year for Zero Trust. In April, the Department of Defense published the Zero Trust reference architecture. Just recently in May, the White House issued an executive order on improving the nation's cybersecurity, which included a requirement for all federal agencies to start planning for and implementing a Zero Trust security strategy. And then just recently in September, the Office of Management and Budget released a draft federal strategy for moving the US government towards a Zero Trust architecture. And in parallel with that, the Department of Homeland Security, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, launched a draft Zero Trust security model. And in that draft includes the 5 pillars of Zero Trust. And this is the framework that CISA is looking at for adoption within the whole of federal government. So in this first pillar, the identity pillar, it's about ensuring and enforcing that the right users have the right access to the right resources at the right time, and using a combination of factors to validate that identity throughout their interactions with services and data. And then the second pillar, the device pillar, it's really about requiring, doing an inventory of devices, knowing what's in your network, securing those devices, and preventing unauthorized devices from accessing resources, and then managing the security of these devices, having a baseline of security and protections, and being able to have visibility of those devices. In the third pillar, the network pillar, it's about segmenting and controlling networks and managing internal and external data flows. It's about aligning network segmentation and protections really according to the needs of application workflows instead of the open trust that's traditionally inherent in network segmentation. So really looking at network segmentation on a smaller kind of need to use basis. And then in the fourth pillar, the application pillar, it's about securing and managing that application layer, as well as providing secure application delivery. So this is about integrating those protections really more closely with those application workflows to ensure that the protections have the visibility and understanding needed to provide effective security. And then in this final pillar, the data pillar, it's about ensuring you have a solid inventory of what data you have, categorizing and label that data, and making sure that you're protecting that data at rest and in transit, and being, understanding your ability to detect data exfiltration. So, it's really critical in this pillar to prioritize the data you have and ensure that that most critical data is protected. So why Zero Trust now? Why has this become such an important initiative? So as we discussed earlier, the Biden administration has really been driving the Zero Trust initiative with the requirement for federal agencies. And a lot of organizations have really realized the value of Zero Trust. 76% have already begun implementation. And a lot of this is being driven by the remote access work environments that have increased the attack surface. Of course, because of COVID-19, there's been a dramatic increase in remote work policies. And in general, just the increasing threats in the landscape have really been driving the need for Zero Trust. So I am now going to hand it over to Alvin Mills, who is going to talk about how Zero Trust is critical in banking organizations.
As this slide represents the number of attacks, ransomware attacks, we continue to see more and more of these types of attacks, especially in 2021, and we don't see that going away anytime soon. And our community banks do a very good job of deploying a defense in depth strategy to prevent and block these kinds of attacks. But there always is some concern that if one of those guards go down, how quickly a bank can recover from a ransomware event. It can be catastrophic. There's so many regulatory and legal requirements around disaster recovery and backups. The goals of that is to, of course, to reduce the financial loss at the bank, and the key there is to ensure that customers and financial markets continue to be served, and then once again comply with all the applicable laws and regulations. At the end of the day, if they are, if there is a ransomware event, then in most cases backups are your only thing to save you from those, and it's all critical to restore as quickly as possible. And this can take, just to prepare and to deploy the requirements for backups, can take a lot of time and resources. Most of our community banks deploy the 3-2-1 method, which is, making 3 copies of the data, keep it backed up on 2 different media, different types of storage media, and then keep at least 1 copy offsite. So during an event, certainly you have so many pieces there to put together to recover. It can take some time, and as I mentioned earlier, the recovery time is critical, ensuring that the customers and the markets continue to be served.
So thank you so much for that, Alvin. And now we are going to hand it over to Todd Hillis and Brian Waltermeyer, who are going to talk about the Zero Trust Easy Win.
The nice thing to remember here is that there's a lot of buzz about this now out there. Zero Trust is the big buzzword, and everybody's trying to figure out what it is. And you see companies talking about, we have had zero trust for a while and yada, yada, yada. But you talked about DIT and DAR, the data at rest and data in transit. A lot of these companies simply protect one of, not both of those entities. So the data in transit piece is taken up by some type of architecture, or the data at rest is taken up. What we're discussing here is the ability to cover both of those things at one time. So not only is the data at rest protected, but the data as it's moving from host to server is also protected. So you asked about things that were happening in the news, and these ransomware gangs are not going away. Black Matter, who was DarkSide, has a new site up where they are posting all of the shame information, where you can download the information of your victim. Not only does that provide hackers very good intel, but it also provides those seeking some type of corporate espionage very good intel. So they get all the contracts, they get all the other things that company was trying to keep a corporate secret out in the open now, and now everybody knows about it. So this is really the combined efforts of protecting your data and making sure that when it is unneeded, it is stored correctly and in a protected fashion, and when it is moving between hosts, it is protected and cannot be intercepted. And I think those are the big takeaways from this.
Thank you for that, Todd. And we are going to hand it over to Brian Waltermeyer, the CEO of Asgard, to talk a little bit more about how EverSafe is a zero trust solution that can help you protect against ransomware and serve as the last line of defense.
Great insight, Todd. And that's, the important thing here is that these are all components of a successful zero trust solution, which includes all these little bits that have kind of been mentioned in the past 15 minutes. The key is to build on that architecture throughout your entire environment and make it as easy as possible to manage and scale, providing the most security and achieving as close as you can to zero trust metrics, some of which you're understanding right now. So if you want to go to the next slide, we can talk a little bit more in detail about what we're talking about. So, before we get into this Maersk case study, which is a fantastic study to look at from an objective observer, obviously not from a Maersk perspective, but zero trust, never trust, always verify. So that is kind of vague, but as Todd was saying, DIT and DAR, the data in transit, data at rest, those are a couple components. Always authenticating. That's a very important component that a lot of people don't understand, because the common solution has been typically a username and a set of passwords or keys to authenticate. And that is typically happening at the human level and not at the device level per se. So when you add in the human element, it adds in a lot of variability and risk, and especially with what we all know today is so many personnel working remotely and having access to different facets or segments of a network for working, for completing their daily objectives. It creates a lot more vulnerability, a much larger attack vector for hackers, and it's extremely important to close those down as much as possible. So zero trust is much more than having a firewall and having that firewall say they have zero trust features, which, in a very basic way they do. But in the true sense of the word and the definition, as described in the history that Jan went over, they don't. Okay, it's more of a marketing ploy to market what they already have in place, because they don't truly have a zero trust architecture. I'm not saying all solutions don't or all companies don't, but the majority that we're seeing, it's more of a spin on this buzzword because it's coming out through the executive order. It's on the tips of everyone's tongues, It's this new thing. It's the highest achievement that a lot of organizations can achieve. So we're going to get a little bit more about a practical solution, what that solution includes, and how other organizations like Maersk could have benefited from using that. So high level, Maersk was one of the largest attacks, hacks, worm virus. It was not Petya to date. Maersk has offices on every continent on the planet, I think, except for Antarctica, and hundreds of offices, thousands and thousands of personnel. They actually have an entire office building in London devoted to their IT team, so there's no shortage of IT staff or apparently funding. But sometimes things are overlooked to envelop simplicity, and that's what ostensibly happened in this case. So Maersk, the shipping company, as you see here in the picture, they had an attack, basically a worm virus that was able to tunnel through all of their networks. Now, the reason that this attack was so successful, so detrimental to Maersk, was because the backup solution for Maersk was what many companies do, is they back up from one office to the next. Maersk has dozens of offices, every major continent. Let's just use our other offices as secure repositories. Sounds smart on paper. It gives them great control. It gives them fluidity amongst the team to understand where things are going. And even if they have copies at an office on every continent, they made a giant oversight. And the giant oversight was, were those backup copies, or their disaster recovery files, however you want to refer to it, they were all on the same network. So this made it very low-hanging fruit for the virus to find, because as it went from device to device, and then all the backups being on the same primary network, they were encrypted just the same as everything else. So the rule is 3-2-1 for backup data. It's 3 different copies, two different types of backup, and 1 being in the cloud. So if you don't have any in the cloud, in this case, that would represent something segmented from your primary network. They didn't have that. They could have hundreds of copies on the primary network, meaningless in this case. So that's essentially what happened. It's a tremendous case study. It's well documented. There's an article in Wired from a couple years ago. If anyone cares to follow up, just search it. It'll come up, Maersk Wired article. But the takeaway and why Maersk is still in operation and only lost $300 million, according to their reports. Other studies have showed probably more than double that amount. But just say $300 million, which is a lot for any organization. The only reason that they were able to recover at all is for sheer luck, or dumb luck in this case. Their North African office was offline due to a power outage, a brownout, and the virus could not transverse the network to those offices where there was backup data. Fortunately, that was their design, but it wasn't their design to have it offline. It was supposed to be online. It was just a complete dumb luck situation where the power was out and the machines were literally turned off. So they were segmented by way of serendipity, I guess, if you want to say it. And when they came back online, they were able to keep the backups segmented from the infected networks and then literally fly those files from North Africa back to the main London office and exchange them. So quite surprising that a company the size of Maersk, this would be their disaster recovery plan. If it hadn't been for a power outage, who knows if they would have ever recovered it or not. So it's a very interesting case study, but one in the abject failure, essentially, of a disaster recovery plan. Next slide, please. Colonial Pipeline, this is very recent. I'm sure everyone here is aware. The thing I want to mention about this attack, this was a very successful ransomware attack that was they were able to access Colonial Pipeline not through a phishing attempt, which is typically the attack vector for hackers, and fooling a personnel to click a link for some reason that is mistaken and then granting access. In this case, the hackers discovered an old or kind of out of date VPN that was still providing connectivity to the network. So a lot of people feel safe that they use VPNs. It creates a strong connection. It often encrypts the data in transit. But in this case, an unattended, outdated VPN was the actual attack vector. So if the attack vector is not secured, it's an open gateway to the environment, to the organization, and to all of the data and all the assets. That's what happened in this scenario. Then the hackers were able to encrypt the files and hold them for ransom. So previous example, Maersk, very poorly designed disaster recovery plan and strategy. They got lucky and were able to survive. Colonial Pipeline sounded like there's not as much documentation about what happened, but they have explained that access was gained through this outdated and unwatched, essentially, a VPN. So it was basically just a secure connection, but an open secure connection to their environment that led to the entire East Coast of the United States having gasoline or fuel shortages. So very significant with regard to the outcome, and it cost Colonial millions of dollars, and allegedly the FBI was able to recover some of the ransom, which logistically, after I read it, didn't make logical sense how it happened, but there's little coverage, so you just kind of have to go with the fact that they say that they did retrieve it. But anyway, two different scenarios, both negative outcomes for the participants. They could have had a much better solution in place. They are available. Next slide, please. So we're going to get a little bit into the tech that we endorse, the reason why we endorse it, and the significance of its attributes. The technology that we have an exclusive license for is from a company called Vernetics. The technology is proven, it's battle tested. It was created in the late 90s in a venture arm of the Central Intelligence Agency for secure battlefield communications. Okay, and from there, its usefulness was patented and went into the commercial world, where Apple shortly thereafter started to use it unlicensed, and the way that they were using it was for their FaceTime connectivity. So anytime two FaceTime connections are happening, two users are talking on their iPhones on their FaceTime, it's using this secure connection to facilitate that connection. They've paid over $500 million in licensing royalties, and there's almost another $500 million in outstanding judgments to be collected for this. Microsoft has paid almost $200 million to settle patent infringement on this technology, and so on and so forth with other large tech companies. So although you might not have ever heard of this technology, it is 100% validated by some of the biggest tech players in the world. You just don't know that it's being used. And what we've done is we've exclusively licensed it to secure the client-side host or a server machine in the on-premise environment of our clients, connecting it to a secure remote cloud. So next slide, please. So this is a brief architecture variation between, on the left side, what you'll see is a common on-site backup and cloud configuration, some of the vulnerabilities that are made obvious as a result of using the common architecture. And listen, it's a good thing to have on-site and off-site backups, not faulting that. We're just pointing out the vulnerabilities that come from that architecture, and we can note those because there are better solutions in the marketplace today. So the common architecture uses an on-premise machine, a proxy server, a storage node where that could all be accessible by someone infiltrating your network, kind of like in the Maersk scenario. And then using a public IP address to connect the on-premise environment to the offsite cloud repository, right? So some vulnerabilities of note are DDoS attacks from public IPs, DNS mapping, which basically means going through your network or adding users or things like that to your domain. Backups can be accessed through the client site. In the case of Colonial Pipeline, they were in the network. And network sniffers, packet sniffers, sniffing traffic, et cetera, just going in and damaging the backups through the current network. So on the right side of the screen is the zero trust solution that we're building up to here. And the big difference is that it doesn't use a public IP address. And then the environment is actually air gapped from the client proxy machine or the client server that's controlling the flow of the backups. So essentially what we have is we have a leading backup solution powered by Veeam, secured by the Vernetics Zero Trust networking technology, managed by Asgard and our team of 24/7 support staff and our own cloud data centers that enable cloud failover, restoration, file retrieval, et cetera, all fully supported, which helps get to the recovery time objectives and things of that nature that are required during an emergency. So the big takeaway is if you're using a public IP for connecting your office and your cloud backups, and they're telling you it's secure because the data is encrypted in transit, it's not as secure as it could be, right? We're not saying that that's a bad thing. There are just more secure options. Next slide, please. So this is what I was speaking to when I said public IPs are the vulnerability in this architecture. What you're looking at right here, the screen is a management console for the Veeam Cloud Connect server from the client side to the cloud repository. And in that red box in the center of the screen where it says Cloud Gateway, you see a strange looking name dedicated by .scom at the end. That is where in Veeam, this is again one of the leading backup softwares in the world, this is where the public IP address would be entered to facilitate the connection between the on-site environment and the cloud environment, which leaves those vulnerabilities that we went over on the first page. When you replace it with what we're showing you right here, this is called a secure domain name, and it uses the Vernetics Zero Trust networking technology. When you replace this, no other machine on the planet can read this. No human on the planet, even knowing that address from the outside, can find or access this network. If you're on a public network, looking to ping networks, looking for open ports, trying to sniff packets, you will not be able to find this. It's an invisible network running on the internet. Okay, so the functionality of the backup itself works identical, but what we've done is we've encapsulated it in the highest level true zero trust networking technology available today, as demonstrated by Apple, Microsoft, Avaya, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the key is removing not only the connection, but the cloud environment and the on-premise machine from the client's network. And when you do that, the level of security rises substantially. Next slide, please. So real quick, some benefits, the features. Air gap, like I mentioned, eliminates the attack service or reduces the attack service. Patented zero trust, yes. Impenetrable connection. It's a dual layer VPN where the outside layer is the secure domain that you saw designated by the .scom, and the inside is a VPN. But one of the important attributes of this technology is that domain is dedicated to a machine. It's not dedicated to a person with a set of keys who could possibly put that application on another machine, maybe like what people on this call have seen with remote workers working from home, and you've given them a VPN to connect. And they say, well, I'm going to put the VPN on my laptop, but if I'm in my office, I'm going to put it on my workstation. And all I have to do is just install the VPN, install the connection. My username and password connects me to my networks. That's pretty good, and it has been the gold standard for a number of years. But if you can imagine being able to move that connection technology based on the person's desires, you can imagine the value of not being able to do that because you want to dedicate a single machine to a specific architecture, so that architecture can only be connected with that machine and that cloud environment. Very, very important, very strong zero trust architecture. Next slide, please. So to give you an idea of what the zero trust SaaS recovery and backup solution looks like versus standard, it's evident here, right? And most of this is gained from the technology that we wrap this entire solution in. We manage the technology. We have been selling and working with this technology for almost 5 years. It is bar none the standard in zero trust security. Okay, so zero trust connection, authentication, which is one thing that was mentioned earlier in the presentation. The machine that is domiciled or directed to that secure domain, that .scom, before it will connect, not only is the network private, not only does it work on a separate set of protocols, but the machines themselves operate almost like tumblers in a spinning lock, generating randomized IP addresses on either side that must match before that secure and visible connection will even be made. So connection is domiciled at the machine level. Authentication happens through randomized IP generation. There's a dual layer VPN designated by a secure domain name, followed by an encrypted VPN tunnel, just to connect to the offsite repository, which is then air-gapped again from the on-site proxy. So that is what zero trust is, not trusting, always authenticating. If you're authenticating with a set of keys and a human, you have a major vulnerability. Colonial Pipeline. Next slide, please. So this is just a little bit about the service that we offer, but a service in general that anybody should be looking for. You should always start with a scoping of the current environment and doing an assessment that will yield basically the gaps that should be filled to achieve zero trust, backups, cloud connection, whatever it is you're looking to achieve, right? In this situation, disaster recovery, always start with a plan. Starting without a plan is like starting a building without a blueprint. It doesn't make any sense. It's not going to be specific to you. It's not going to cover your needs. And when there's a problem, it will crumble. We've done it. We've been there. We've suffered through it. We're typically blamed for it. It's not a fun thing for any participant to have. Why not just use an agreed upon blueprint from the beginning to ensure that the cadence of your server restoration is in accordance with the business's cash flow needs, to make sure that the staff who has access to this is updated on a regular basis, so people aren't walking away with certain commands or certain responsibilities or potential passwords, right? We've seen that before. Oh, we let the IT manager go last month, and apparently he took a lot of our passwords. Do you guys have those? Had that conversation during a ransomware attack. Hard to believe. You can't make this stuff up. These are the things that happen, right? The implementation is obviously just creating the architecture, matching that with the plan, then onboarding, facilitating the backups, ensuring the backups have successfully been seeded, testing the backups, reporting back to the client that they're there. That is what should happen whenever you're implementing a new service, or if your organization hasn't done this to this full 1 through 5 step, you should absolutely go back, talk to your IT director, talk to your IT team, bring in your CISO, and talk to them about, let's start with the scope. Let's go over the assessment. What's our DR plan? When was the last time it was updated? When was the last time it was tested? Right? These are the things that cause extended periods of downtime. When I say extended, I don't mean minutes. I mean days or weeks of downtime. Right? So if you're spinning up 10, 20, 50 servers in a disaster recovery scenario, and you have some large servers that perhaps take a day or two to recover, and you're trying to do those first, but they're not that important, you're pushing back the entire recovery time frame for something that could have been achieved possibly within a day, right? And if you have it planned right, you should be able to recover most any environment in a day, if not within an hour, right? So that's the importance. We've seen recoveries take days. We've seen companies have to run from the cloud for 6 months or more when it should have happened within weeks. And that's a complete wipeout of a client site, complete rebuild, because they shut down power when an attack occurred. These are things that need to be talked about and discussed, scoped, and planned ahead of any implementation. So what we see a lot of the time is companies say, hey, we have backups here, we have backups there. Think back to Maersk, right? What did they do? Yep, we have backups in 7 continents. We're awesome. And you almost lost everything. It's a fallible plan, right? And if you don't test it, you have no clue. So next slide, please. So this is just a quick case study of something I've kind of referenced some of the crazy situations that we've experienced. But I'll say in 2020, shortly after COVID hit, March, April, May, we had our clients had an explosion of ransomware attacks that caused businesses to shut down for periods of time. And depending on what their plan was, like I mentioned, this company, a large company in New York City, their IT manager was fired a month before COVID started, and he left with the passwords, maybe as a kind of little unhappy gift when he left. But the case I'll mention here is we had a client get hit with ransomware. They were running Zero Trust, and what they were able to do, because they were using the Zero Trust, hacker got into their network through a phishing attack. It was kind of thwarted quietly by the IT team internally. We weren't made aware of it. About 4 or 6 weeks later, there was an emergency, which this attack or attackers resurfaced again, had been in the network the entire time. And again, if we don't have visibility into a network, we're just waiting for the command on the outside, and we're ensuring that the backups and the secure connection are in place. That's our job. But if we're not made aware, there's nothing much we can do until they make us aware. So it appeared that a few hackers had been in the network for about a month or so, and they had encrypted a lot of the files within the databases and the on-premise environment. Now, through forensic study, they weren't able to access anything in the cloud repository. And like I said, in fact, we weren't, as a service provider, aware that this was even occurring, because as far as we were concerned, the backups were completing at their scheduled time frame. The tests were completing, showing clean files. But when they made us aware, we restored them to the cloud. They ran from the cloud successfully. Business went uninterrupted, except for some adjustments for people now having to log in remotely, working from home, their laptops, etc. But the forensics analysis conducted by the cybersecurity insurance company, who had the policy for this group, reported that they saw where some of the hackers went, and they repeatedly went to the proxy machine with the Zero Trust connection, but to no avail, right? So although they were able to go through the entire network of this organization, although they were able to encrypt tens of millions of files, and although they were able to find the proxy server that is directing backups offsite to our cloud, because there's a zero connection domain name in place, everything I've just described, they're thwarted. They can't conduct a DDoS. They can't use that DNS mapping. They can't use that IP address to do anything because it is a private IP address running on a completely separate technology and protocol. So it's hard to determine exactly, what's happening at certain periods of time. But if you have an ironclad lock on your last line of defense, you're better off than the next guy. And that's what we're always trying to accomplish. Implementing the best technology, implementing the best solutions, implementing the best plans for a business's continuity that accounts for their personnel and their cash flows and their operations, right? And that's what, back to this planning phase. So next slide, please. So that's it. I hope that was clear about some of the features of zero trust solutions, and some of our experiences that we've seen, that we're seeing, and what the marketplace looks like today. So don't be fooled by your firewall company coming out and saying, oh, hey, now we offer zero trust, and you look at it and you say, well, that button's always been there. They're just calling it zero trust. It's not. Zero trust requires a certain level and a hierarchy of permissions and technological implementations that yield authentication, permission down to the device level, encryption for data in transit, data at rest, and segmentation. So when you combine all of those things, you have a true zero trust solution. We're not saying we have a corner on zero trust. We have the only zero trust backup and DR solution available in the marketplace today, but you could certainly have zero trust solutions for different segments of your network or remote connectivity for your personnel and things like that. But it's important to note what zero trust means and what somebody might be trying to tell you it means, right? So that's it. I'm happy to entertain some questions as a team when you all are ready. So I see a question. What would be next steps to discuss EverSafe for our organization? The next step is easy. We set a call. You can send us an email here at info@asgardmsp.com. And again, we reflect back to the 1 through 5 steps. It starts with a high level call, understanding what the needs are, doing a scope, doing a gaps assessment. If you want to move forward, it moves into a disaster recovery plan. Then it goes into a proposal of services that would match the disaster recovery plan. An agreement is signed, the service is implemented, the service is seeded in the cloud, it's tested, reported upon, and you're revisited on a minimum of a monthly basis. Another question. We would have our own organization's secure domain .scom and visible from the public internet. That is correct. Every client using this service has their own secure domain name. So it could be anything that you want, any naming convention that works for your company, but it's going to end with the suffix .scom. And that's what the technology is. So don't misconstrue .scom being just another domain or naming convention. This is a completely separate technology from what most people have ever seen running on the public internet. So those are the questions. Oh, here comes another one. Can we include this as a service in addition to how we currently do backups? Yes, of course. So again, that would fall back into what is your, where are the gaps? Addressing those gaps. Do you want to fill those gaps? How do we fill those gaps? We just did a deal where they have a site-to-site disaster recovery for a very large environment, multiple hundreds of servers in this environment. So they felt most comfortable facilitating that between their multiple offices. Think like the Maersk example. They're using a very basic cloud backup as their third repository and first offsite repository, the 3-2-1 rule, remember? So they're doing that now, and it's not as secure or as robust as the Zero Trust Eversafe. So they transitioned their backups from one provider to another and maintained their on-premise disaster recovery processes and service that they manage themselves as it was. So this can be done disaster recovery as a service, which is most of what we've talked about today, because that is the most impactful thing. And that's what we would recommend for any organization that has any meaningful assets or cash flow or staff that they want to ensure in perpetuity. And but it can be constructed. We could manage, and we do manage, site-to-site disaster recovery solutions through the Zero Trust Eversafe solution as a service for our clients, or we could augment that by just doing the backups in the Zero Trust environment, right? So there's different ways to achieve this, but again, it's all about the organization itself, what they're trying to achieve, what they need to have in place. That maybe that's for compliance. If you're a federally mandated organization, the Zero Trust executive order that came out last month, it could be any different number of things. So that's why it's very difficult to just say, hey, I have a DR service, or hey, I have backups in the cloud, we're all set. It needs to be so much more granular and understood than that. And that's what we help organizations do. And at the end of the day, we implement the most secure, redundant disaster recovery and backup of the service available. Another question. Implementing Zero Trust data backup protection should help us with cybersecurity insurance compliance, reducing rates, hopefully. We have seen that. Every insurance company is different, but yes, we've definitely seen that. The more robust the offsite backup or DR service, the better the rates that they're getting. I don't know exactly what that means for any specific organization, but we have definitely seen that. One other question that we do get asked a lot is, with the connection technology happening, the dual layer, VPN, the authentication, and everything that we've discussed here today, does it slow down the transfer times between the client side and the cloud? It's measurable in microseconds, but it's not noticeable. So you'd have to have, terabytes and terabytes, 10, 20 terabyte size machines for this to be measurable at all. And when I say that, you're talking, minutes and, an additional backup time because of the encryption, decryption process. Minutes, not hours. So, typically we're doing backups between 1 and 3 times a day for clients, and it's not impactful. And depending on the solution, then maybe you have a dedicated line of bandwidth for this process or something of that nature where it doesn't matter at all. But that's something a lot of people ask about. So that's the last question that I see on here. If anyone has any other questions, happy to answer it. If you'd like more information, there's some explanatory videos on our website. I know Deb and her team have lots of information and recommendations and suggestions around Zero Trust. This is something that we're all getting behind strongly because this is what's needed today. And the explosion and ransomware and attacks is for real. It's not just some scary headlines happening. We saw a multiple times increase on our client attacks in the last year, and they're still happening. So I don't think this is going away anytime soon. I think people have been emboldened and they're getting paid to do it. I think the average ransomware attack is somewhere close to $500,000 now. So if anyone has any further questions, happy to answer. Otherwise, maybe Jane, you want to take it back?
Thanks so much, Brian, for all that great insight. Also want to give a special thanks to Todd Hillis for all of his expertise, and a special thank you to Alvin Mills and the Texas Bankers ISAL. Asgard is extending a 10% discount to all Texas Bankers ISAL members, and they are happy to set up a free consultation or a free trial. You could just reach out to info@asgardmsp.com. We will also be making available all of the resources we used in this presentation. There is additional collateral about EverSafe that you can check out as well. And we thank you so much for joining us today and hope to hear from you soon. Thank you.